So let me sort of officially get things started. Welcome to the Quality Online Course Series, Learning Objectives and Assessments. This particular workshop aligns with two of the Quality Matter standards, Quality Standards 2 and 3. If you're not familiar with Quality Matters, that is fine. This will still be relevant information to you. But if you do hope to have your online course reviewed for internationally recognized quality standards, here at NIU we've adopted Quality Matters. So this kind of just will tie that together for you. But again, I think any of these things that we're going to cover today are going to be valuable to you in your online teaching and online course design. So my name is Tracy Miller, and I'm the Assistant Director at the Faculty Development and Instructional Design Center. Just some contact information. Email is my best contact mode because I always have it on hand and I refer to it frequently. So let's kind of kick some interaction off a little bit. And you could add your answer into the text chat area. So when you design an online course, or maybe even a face-to-face course, how do you know what to teach? So I'll give you a couple minutes to put your answers into the text chat area. I'll also read through some of them, and that's for the recording because the text chat area won't actually show up in the recording. Previous course syllabus and adopted text. Yes, that often happens. I want to make sure I'm caught up on my attendance. Department course outline. Yes. Course syllabus text research. I look at the AAS standards of biology. Sure. Info relevant and timely to respect of the topic. All very common answers, and I think it's going to build on what we're going to talk about this afternoon. But quality online course design really starts with your course objectives. So I think about what Kim said about the department course outline. The department may have provided you with your course objectives, and that's how you sort of know how to build out your course at that point. The information about a course syllabus and standards, you know, we're going to look through all of those and, you know, think about what is it that we want students to be able to do at the completion of the course. What that is that those are our course objectives. So all of your answers are very relevant, but I think the part right now is thinking about all of those things. Really, it's what are your objectives? What do you want your students to get out of taking this course? So another poll, I'm going to use the poll tool this time, like I did for the Can You Hear Me? So what is the source of your course objectives? I mentioned your department may give them to you. So just use it's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, but just use that as the ABCD. Let me know where you're getting your course objectives from. Maybe if it's an old syllabus, was it from the old syllabus? Maybe a previous faculty member or instructor took it. And of course, if you rather add your ABCD into the text chat area, you can also do that. Okay, Kim says B, they are department mandated. A, I wrote them. B's and A's. This is very typical. I think these are very sort of the most frequently one. Either someone had that sort of freedom to write their own, or the department, perhaps a curricular committee, came up with the course objectives and you're sort of handed them. So very good answers there. And I'm glad nobody said, I don't know. So how familiar would you say you are with writing objectives? So are you an expert? Could you train others? Can you just take over this workshop for me? You're very familiar. You've been writing them for years. You feel pretty confident about them. Somewhat, but maybe that's why you're here. You're hoping that you can improve on that a little bit, or really a novice and have never learned anything about them, which, by the way, is also very common unless you're in education. Lauren said, biology. That may not be something, if you're a biology professor, that you're taught to write, amazing writing objectives for biology. So everybody seems to like the text chat area for that. So if you'd like to use the text chat area, go ahead. I could write objectives, but for a whole 16-week course, I would need assistance. Okay, and I like that you mentioned that, because we're going to talk about sort of those course level objectives and module level objectives, which those module could also be called a week. Just kind of how you chunk things up. So a lot of people very familiar with this. Great. I'm going to maybe ask you to share some examples, or maybe even some best practices that you've had in writing learning objectives, because I think that'll be really valuable to everyone. I'm not the type of presenter that just thinks I know everything. I know that you all have a lot of expertise and amazing insights. So I'm hoping that we can really kind of work together and learn together in the workshop today. Okay, so here are some examples, and I'm probably going to refer back to these examples to kind of get at some of the points that I'd like to make. They don't really fit together. They wouldn't be in one class, but I think they give us enough examples that we can all sort of identify them a little bit. So first of all, when we're talking about course level objectives, we are thinking about what the students will be able to do by the completion of the course. Something that they can go on and do after they're done with the course, right? That's what we're hoping, that this is something that sticks with them. So I think in order to really frame writing objectives, I really like to start with this: by the end of the course, by the completion of the course, you will be able to, and you meaning the student, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the students, when they read those, they can kind of understand that it is about what they will be able to do. So we've got a couple examples here. Write a thematic analysis paper comparing themes in 3 works of fiction. Develop and deliver an organized and effective persuasive speech that uses visual aids. Draw a well-labeled free body diagram showing all real forces that act on an object. So you can already see that we're talking about very different courses here. But there's a couple things that these have in common. And so we're going to break them down a little bit and talk about why these were constructed the way they were. Now, are they perfect? Are they the most awesome written objectives ever? Probably not, but I think it's a good place to kind of describe those components that make up a really good learning objective. So first of all, an objective includes a behavior or an action verb. It starts with that action verb, and we'll talk about why that action verb is so important. But what is the action that you are going to be able to see the action, that behavior that you're going to be able to see the students perform in order to know that they have achieved your learning objectives? Next, there should be some kind of conditions. So If we kind of pop back to this one, if the action verb is to develop and deliver an organized and effective persuasive speech. Maybe the conditions that they need to be organized and effective. They don't just need to deliver and develop a persuasive speech. So it's giving you a little bit of the condition that they need to do. Finally, the criteria, so the degree of performance that they would need to do. That might be, again, using the same example again, the condition may, or the criteria is that they need to use visual aids. That's part of the criteria that they need to do to meet those learning objectives. So let's break that down into more bite-sized chunks, more specificity. Um, Learning objectives describe what students will learn. So by the end of this course, you will be able to write a thematic paper. So what we want them to learn is we want them to learn how to write a thematic analysis paper, but we also want them to know how to do a thematical analysis of something, and they're going to demonstrate that through a paper. We want our students to be able to speak in a persuasive manner. And so what we're asking them to learn about is what a persuasive speech is all about and how they can develop and deliver one. So this is really the crux of what we're hoping they'll learn. The reason we don't use words like the students will learn or understand about a thematic analysis paper or persuasive speech is going to be more what we're going to talk about next, and that's that the students need to be able to measure. We need to be able to measure that they've learned it, and it's really hard to measure something that when you use words like learn or understand, it's hard to observe or measure that students have done that. I mean, we have an intuition about it, but the idea is you're going to really use that action verb to help you measure the student's achievement of the learning objective. So another important part, and we'll talk more about what I mean by observable and measurable, but another important part about a learning objective is that it's written from the student perspective. Talked a little bit about that previously, but if you're really intentional about saying you will be able to, that is kind of letting the students know that it's all about them and it's from the student's perspective. You can also start it off with the students will be able to, our learners will be able to, but I think you really directly gets at that student perspective. So again, I always add it to the top as I'm writing learning objectives to keep me focused that way. One of the things about writing it from the learner perspective is also that you won't maybe go back to writing about what you, the instructor, is going to cover in the class. So that's oftentimes the way learning objectives are written. And if you received yours from your department and they've been mandated, you might see that they were written that way. This course will cover these topics. Even the textbook will cover these topics. But what we really want to do is flip it to that student perspective, again, of what the students will be able to do upon completion of the course. So let's jump back in about what we mean about observable. And so we said learn and understand is really hard to observe. So if you start off with these action verbs, that's something that you can observe. If you're asking the students to write a thematic analysis paper, you're going to be able to observe their understanding of thematical analysis because they've written a paper. And they've written in you know, ways that maybe you've constructed a rubric for, you've presented them with guidelines or expectations, and they understand how that should be written. Same with develop and deliver. You can actually see if they've created an outline and then they delivered a speech. That's something you can observe. I would caution about using two verbs. We want to make sure that we stay away from students will be able to understand a well-written thematical analysis paper. Like, you can kind of get a little cloudy with your verbs. So if you can keep it to one verb, that's what I would recommend. And then draw, again, obviously, very observable. Measurable. So observable and measurable can sound like the same sort of thing, and sometimes we'll use it interchangeably. But I think when we compare those action verbs, those behaviors at the beginning of the well-written learning objective with some of that criteria at the end, you'll see how observable and measurable may be distinct a little bit. So in this case, a student may write a thematical analysis paper, but they may not write it in ways that that we want them to, that we can then measure them against. If you remember, we talked about the criteria being some kind of degree of performance. So in this case, the thematic paper should be comparing themes in 3 works of fiction. So we may have them, they may write a thematic paper, however, they'll only compare themes in 2 works of fiction, and so then they would not be measured as high as if they had met that 3 works of fiction criteria. The one at the bottom, draw a well-labeled 3-body diagram showing all real forces that act on an object. There's actually a lot of criteria in here. I can almost see the rubric writing itself here. It needs to be well labeled. There needs to be some sort of definition of what we mean by well labeled, using a free body diagram as opposed to a different type of diagram. And then, all of the real forces, did they draw all of the real forces, or did they miss some? So all of these sort of things become really measurable. What is a free body diagram? Read, good question. This is sort of a learning objective for a physics course, I'm guessing, and we're going to kind of talk about the level of the course. I wonder if our scientists out there have a better idea of what a free body diagram would be. But I'm thinking maybe kind of a, just free-handed sketch of something, but then adding labels into it. I see it kind of being outside of maybe anything that's in a grid, or, some kind of bell chart or something more just kind of free-flowing. But good question. Sorry, I don't have a really good answer for that one. But it could be, if we were talking about criteria, it could be that we wanted something very specific like a free body diagram, and what the students gave us was that bell chart. And so that would have been, wrong. So let's talk about, if there's no physics people in the room, can we still make some guesses on what the appropriate level of the course might be for these different learning objectives? Because that's also something important to consider when you're writing them. So do we think that the thematical analysis paper, is that introductory, a 100 level course? Or is that something maybe more in the 300, 400 level course? I tend to think that the second one, the persuasive speech, might be sort of that basics of speech class, an introduction of communications type course. But because it's very specific about persuasive speeches, maybe that's a higher level course. So just kind of share in the text chat area where you think these different ones fall into. And by the way, I think that's definitely something that, you as the expert in your discipline, in your field, would have a really good grasp on. I think a couple of our earlier statements was, maybe you received a syllabus, or maybe you are kind of looking through a textbook, and you're going to kind of make that determination, right? Is this the appropriate level for the course? Okay, 304 level. Yep. Need to develop some of these skills early. Yeah, and that's exactly what happens. So fully developed by graduation. So there's also, that gets at that criteria a little bit, right? So um, there may be sort of a more basic criteria for something that's in a 100, 200 level course, and then it's going to become more complex as we get to those higher levels, and then of course we want them to walk away with all of that upon graduation. And you can kind of bump up these course level objectives to say, what are our program level objectives? So when the student has completed a full program, what level of understanding, I don't want to use that word, but what level will they be at, that we know that we can kind of send them off into the world and be confident that they are prepared. But we're not going to talk too much about program level. We're going to actually bring it down a little bit. We're going to talk about online courses, including those module objectives. So I know someone earlier, Natalie said that she'd need some help if she had needed 16 weeks of module objectives to write. So there's no great number on a course level objective. I've seen maybe 5 to 10 of them. But then if you're going to break it down into those 16 weeks, what do you hope your students are able to do by the end of a module or by the end of a week? And just like what do we want them to be fully developed by graduation? What do we want them to learn each week and build up that achievement until they have mastered all of the course objectives by the end of the course? So let's talk about module objectives a little bit. So they're more granular and detailed than course objectives. Course objectives might be not as detailed. So if I even think back to the ones about developing and delivering a persuasive speech, that might actually be a better one for a module level learning objective, because maybe the course objective is that they are to design and develop several different types of speeches. And so covered in 1 week, or maybe a couple weeks, you're going to focus in on that persuasive type speech. So they tend to be more granular, more detailed. They also might be, like the second one, sequenced for increasing mastery. So maybe in the speech idea again, you want them first to master that outline of a speech, and then the next week you're going to want them to master doing some research into conducting their speech, and so as the modules go on, as the weeks go on, throughout the course, they're sort of sequenced in becoming more complex, and they're increasing their mastery as they go through the course. And then the other thing is that they need to support the course objectives. So we're going to talk a little bit about alignment. And alignment is a pretty big deal when we're talking about designing a course. And so I hope I can share some tips with you on how to align things, making that the whole course come together in a way that's really going to help your student experience. So each module objective should support a course objective, and you should share how they connect with each other with your students. And that's really to help your students understand the relevancy and the purpose of sort of why they're doing these things in the course. So the way I like to do that is to create sort of a table like this. And so what I do is I put the course level objectives across the top. And so in this example, it's an evaluation course, and it has 4 course learning objectives. And then I will add the module level objectives in column 1 down the side. So as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, okay, so how does this first one explore the logic of a program evaluation? Explore the logic of a program evaluation. And so what does that really align with when I look at the course level objectives? So again, the module level objectives are more discrete, and the program level objectives are kind of those higher level ones. So in this case, I really feel like the logic of a program evaluation is really going to help the students complete this objective of planning a program evaluation. And you can kind of read through these yourself, but what you'll typically see happen is that, you know, each module level objective may address one course level objective. The bottom one here addresses several of them. What you're looking for when you can create this table is that you don't have a module level objective that really doesn't align with any of your course level objectives. Or if you have a module level objective that you really feel strongly about, maybe that means that there should be an additional course level objective that needs to be written that kind of addresses that. The other thing is, as you look at these and you have all of your module level objectives in here, is there a course level objective that you're really never touching on throughout the course? Because then you want to build in something that will address that so that you know that the students are able to achieve those learning objectives. So I like using that chart to kind of make sure that my module level objectives align with the course level objectives. And I also use all of those sort of guides and frameworks to actually writing them. So we're going to close off on learning objectives a little bit here. We're going to jump into our assessments. But just to kind of wrap things around what Quality Matters says about quality online courses, we kind of wrapped into this big sentence. The numbers you see next to these are all called specific review standards. And so those are those sort of more bite-sized standards that QM addresses as it relates to learning objectives in a quality online course. Quality courses have measurable course objectives, which are consistent with the module level objectives. They are written from the student perspective or the learner's perspective. They relate to the other activities in the course, and we'll talk about course activities when we talk about assessments coming up, and also that they're suited to the level of the course. So when we are done with this workshop, and I get ready to send you out the recording, I'm also going to send you a couple checklists. And you can use those checklists whether you're sort of reviewing your own course or whether you're developing a new course, and just kind of check those boxes as you kind of gone through these steps. So let's talk about assessments a little bit. So assessments in a quality online course measures those course objectives, right? So what are some things that we can do to start to make sure that our assessments do in fact align with and measure our course objectives? So let's just have a little bit of a discussion in the text chat again. What is your favorite assessment and why do you use it? So just share a little bit. When I talk to folks about creating an online course or doing something different in their online course, I always ask them, what's that activity that you just know that students are getting it? The discussion board. So you like talking to your students. That's awesome. Can you tell me why you use it? Checking for their understanding. Excellent. Okay, so I actually really like your example in facilitating discussions. Um, so, I kind of said that it's really hard to measure a student's understanding, but if you use the right action verb, you sort of can, right? So if you wrote a learning objective that said students will be able to discuss ABC topic, or students will be able to explain this concept, then you could actually observe that through a discussion board. So rather than writing learning objectives like students will be able to understand this concept, you could write it as students will be able to um, explain this topic, and you would do that through an assessment using your discussion board. So I really like that example. Let me see some of what others wrote. I like to give my undergraduates experiences like go observe and reflect on that. Observe and reflect is awesome. That shows me action. They're going to go out and observe. I may not in an online course be able to observe them observing, but I will see that through the reflection. These are pre-service teachers, and I want them to be in the room. Then they can come back to the discussion board and upload a written project. Yes, and so they could be, obviously they would be observing someone teaching, maybe student teaching themselves, and then they would be reflecting it back to you or writing about their experience, sharing their experiences through a discussion board, everything that you can observe in an online course. You can also observe it if they were to film themselves, maybe as a pre-service type of activity. Just being careful that they weren't filming students without parental consent. I just know a lot about pre-service teachers, so I think a lot about that. They could also do some kind of observation protocol, and that would be what they would submit to you. So a lot of good ideas in that one. Stephanie likes portfolios, allows me to assess various artifacts, activities, reflections, discussion boards capturing engagement and understanding. Yes, and a discussion board can also be a great assessment, but it could also be just that way to interact with your students. And so discussion boards are a great tool for that. However, I'm going to suggest that just think about your favorite assessment and why you use it. And really, the correct answer is because it directly measures the course objectives. So I gave you a lot of ideas about how I think these assessments might align with some of your learning objectives. So again, just give that kind of some thought. Do you have a learning objective about observing teaching, or do you have a learning objective for facilitating discussions? Is that something that you want your students to be able to do. I could see that would be a great learning objective, facilitating a discussion. Maybe it's facilitating a debate, and it's going to take place on a discussion board. So we're going to bring that alignment in a little bit more again. One of the things that we look for, again, is that the assessments align with our learning objectives. If we think a little bit back to the quality matters again, that happens to be that specific review standard 3.1. We want to make sure that the assessments also align with the learning materials. And so is the text, is the content, is your lectures, also giving them what they need to be successful in doing the assessments, being successful in the assessments. Again, how are you going to measure their achievement of the learning objectives? You're going to do it through the assessments, and the learning materials need to align so that they can get to that place. Course activities really can be anything that you do in your course. It could be more passive, like reading the textbook or watching lectures, but it could be something like a practice activity, actual assessment, participating in a discussion board, observing and reflecting. All of those things have action to them, and they become your course activities, and they all just need to fit together and align. Technology is the last bullet point here. The technology that you choose for your assessments needs to help foster the student's achievement and being successful with the assessments and not hinder them. So your technology could be using a discussion board, would be very appropriate and would align with your assessment. If you're picking out technology that does not seem to align with your assessments and your learning objectives, then maybe that's something that you can just kind of drop. So here's what I do. I love these tables. That helps me know that my assessments are aligned with my learning objectives. So similar to the other one, I add my course objectives across the top. I may do this at the module level. I may add my module level objectives across the top and just look at the assessments for that module or for that week. This particular example that I'm using, it goes back to that evaluation course, and the assessments are more project-based and they sort of build over time. So in this example, it works kind of better to do the assessment matrix at the course level. So in this case, I have some discussion boards, and the discussion boards have to do with having the students discuss evaluation and educational technology. And I really felt like this would help meet the objective of explaining different roles of evaluation. The prompt that I use for a discussion board might literally say that, please explain the different roles in evaluations. The course materials that I might provide for them may be definitions of the different roles of evaluation. Again, that alignment, it's all going to work together. Just like my alignment with modules and course objectives, sometimes an assessment is only really going to get at one course objective, like this first one I just went over. The second one, the program prospectus that they do, is actually, it's phased over time, and it's actually kind of going to get at each of the course level objectives. Again, we're looking for variety, but we're also looking for gaps. So this particular objective here, apply the evaluation methodologies to authentic situations, is measured through many different assessments, varied assessments here. And each of the assessments, again, may fit one of them or many of them. Right now, I don't see any that have any gaps. But if, again, I see a course objective that doesn't have an assessment, that's my cue to write assessment for it. If I have an assessment that really doesn't seem to line up with any course objectives, then that might be my cue that that assessment is not necessary, even if we love it. Or we need to write an objective for it. So I talked a lot about measuring through multiple assessments, and I like to describe that as the power of multiple measurements. And so that will give students multiple ways to demonstrate their understanding to me. That will give me not just that one shot that maybe they had a bad day, still give them multiple ways that they can show me that they are there, that they are ready to either move on to the next module or they're ready to be successful by the end of the class. Having several different assessments also allows you the opportunity to give your students feedback frequently. Students in online courses can feel very isolated. There's that disconnection, and feedback is really the way that they connect with you and possibly connect with each other. We talked about the engagement in a discussion board. Students often give each other feedback in a discussion board. So that's something that they really brings them out a little bit more and really lessens that feeling of isolation. The multiple measurements also gives you that chance of sequencing. So building up that level of mastery. Again, do they do a draft of their thematic paper? Then they get some kind of feedback from you, and then they write a more refined paper. So those multiple measurements really give you the opportunity to sequence their achievement. And then also, it can really, that variety can actually help you with some active learning strategies in which the students are really engaged in what they're doing. They're not being as passive. Some online courses can be read the text, take a quiz, read the text, take a quiz. And that's not really actively engaged in what they're doing in the course. So if you give them some of this variety, you give them different ways that they can do this, it really can bring them into feeling connected with the content. I love the, Natalie's pre-service observation and reflection. That to me, sometimes I get this question, it's a really good example of experiential learning because the students are really experiencing teaching techniques, and they're able to either maybe do that a little bit more passively through observation, but then more actively through actually their student teaching. So that's a really good example of being experiential. And then having them go back and reflect on it keeps them actively engaged because they're kind of re-experiencing it as they reflect on it. A couple other just kind of tips. We're kind of getting away from the alignment a little bit, but quality online course, as far as it goes in terms of assessment, is to provide your students with a clear grading policy. That might be in your syllabus, that might be in the course information, but it really helps the students understand early in the course how their work will be evaluated and sort of what their progress is in the course. So letting your students know how grades are calculated and the relationship are the weights between grades. So something that's maybe more formative, like a quiz, might have a less point value than a major paper or a portfolio like Stephanie was talking about. I could see where that would be a pretty major project that would be weighted pretty high. Assignments are clearly indicated so that they know up front how many discussion boards they're going to have to do, how many papers they're going to have to do, any of those sorts of things, letting them know early. And then there might also be something in there like your policy on late submissions. And again, might be in syllabus. It's completely up to you, but it's just the idea of letting your students know what your policy is. So do you accept late work? Do you not accept late work? Do you deduct points after a certain amount of days? That sort of thing. Just letting your students know early and upfront and very clearly about your grading policies. Any criteria that you have for the work. And we talked about that criteria being in your learning objectives. But the way you're going to really define that and really define your expectations could be through rubrics, could be through checklists, providing your students with exemplars. I often ask my students, if I do see a really amazing exemplar, I'll ask them for permission to share that with my students in the next semester that I work with. I may even share it with the students then, kind of highlighting, showcasing some great work. But it also can be kind of shown the point value. You're kind of letting them know how important it is to you just through that point value that you give students in their work. We talked a little bit about feedback earlier. Again, it's really important that they frequently receive feedback from you in an online course, that you don't sort of disappear for a while, that you're kind of checking in with them. And sometimes you can do sort of whole course feedback, maybe through an announcement, or that individual feedback, either in a discussion board or the grades that you give them. Communicating with your students, again, also should be done frequently, but let them know the results of their assessments through your grading. You know, make sure you keep up with their grades so that they're not halfway through the semester and they suddenly realize that they just sort of didn't get it and they're already kind of too far down that trail. Let your students do self-evaluation. So that might be through the reflection. Do you have a self-evaluation that you'd like the students to complete? Giving them kind of prompts that will help them be able to self-evaluate their work. You can also give your students the opportunity to do peer evaluations. So if they'd like to share their paper on a discussion board and just say, hey, can you kind of give me some feedback before I turn that in? It sounds like being dishonest a little bit, but if you kind of build that opportunity for them and say, hey, I want you to work together, I want you to give each other feedback, you know, that's just going to get them to that next level and help them engage with each other. But I'm curious, how do you give your students feedback now? I probably gave away all the good ideas, but I was hoping I could learn some more. And if you can think of any way that you would have done it in your face-to-face course, perhaps we can even change up that approach a little bit and talk about how you would do it in an online course. All right, well, if you're texting something in, please share. Oh, here we go. In an online course through gradebook, portfolio announcements, individualized email, discussion posts, follow-ups, synchronized meetings. We talked a lot about these, but I want to kind of talk about the synchronous meetings. You're absolutely right. If you do a office hour using Blackboard Collaborate Ultra like we're using right now, you can definitely give your students some feedback immediately if they come to you with questions and your office hour is kind of taking on that question and answer feedback. Or it could be a synchronous meeting where you're just kind of letting all of your students know that, hey, I just read your papers and here's some feedback that I'd like to give to you. So I'm really glad you added that, Stephanie. Thank you. So the feedback loop, again, I've got another one of my tables because I want to make sure that I address all the different types of interaction that you might have with your students in the course. First, your interaction between you. We talked a lot about how we could do that. Stephanie gave us some great examples. Student-to-student interaction. Again, the discussion board could be a way that they're interacting together. Could be a group project. I will share something about my own history. I was an online student many years ago, and I would actually kind of off-channel outside of the course still connect with my fellow students, and I'm still friends with many of them. So students could be even getting feedback from each other outside of the course environment. Self-checks, again, do you give them self-evaluation? Is there any kind of tool that you can give them that will help them kind of self-check their work? Giving them their own sort of feedback. Maybe you ask them to put it away for a couple days and then reread it, and they suddenly make refinements to their work. The last one I have here is just adaptive technology. That's a little bit advanced and not something that we use a lot here at NIU. But if there was anything that you could build into some sort of adaptive technology, maybe if a student is sort of falling behind, your sort of method of adapting may be giving them some additional work to do, additional resources they might want to tap into, or if they were really catching on quickly, again, you may adapt a little bit and give them maybe some more complex scenarios just to kind of keep them still engaged. And that would be through your feedback. You would give them some type of feedback and let them know that, hey, this is where you could take it to the next level. But again, I want to make sure that in all of these assessments, I've kind of thought out about how and when they are going to receive their feedback. We're actually in the last couple minutes of the workshop, so I want to make sure I wrap this up and honor your time with me this afternoon. Quality online courses have multiple and varied assessments that measure course and module level objectives with a clear grading policy that includes descriptive criteria for evaluation, and that students have opportunities to track their progress. And that really gets at those, the power of multiple assessments. Here's some things that we talked about. So if there's 5 things that I really want you to remember, it's these. To really start with strong objectives. Make sure that they are observable and measurable and student-centered. They should align, the assessment should align with the objectives. Everything should be clearly defined. In an online course, we don't always have that opportunity to gauge our students' confused look on their face, so we need to make everything really clear. And then students should receive frequent feedback on their progress to be successful. Again, my name is Tracy Miller, and I'm the Assistant Director here in Faculty Development. My contact information is right there. I will send you a follow-up email with the recording and those checklists I talk about. I'm also adding a survey link into the text chat area, but I'll send it in that follow-up email also. If you could take just a couple minutes to give me some feedback on the workshop, I really honor it and I take it seriously, and I always like to kind of weave it into the next time I do the workshop. But other than that, thank you so much, you all, for being here with me. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great afternoon. And I will hang out a couple minutes for questions if anyone has them. You're welcome, everyone. Thank you so much.